Welcome to the Workspace podcast, a place to take up space, a space for you to settle in, sit back, relax, and focus a little bit on health, wellness, faith, family, and this crazy thing called life.
This podcast is not a replacement for mental health treatment or professional health care. In case of crisis or emergency, please contact your local healthcare provider or dial 911.
Welcome to the Workspace podcast. I am looking forward to the second part of our conversation today with Anastasia Wynn, our clinical director here at Hope and Healing, as we continue to talk about healthy boundaries with teleworking. And today it's all about the do's and the tricks and the tips. So stick around.
Prepare and Enrich is a service that we'll be offering to premarital couples. It is a strength-based program that utilizes assessment portion and then subsequent sessions to look at that assessment and discuss what are your strengths, what are the areas of growth, what are conversations that you'd like to have as you are leading up to and preparing for marriage. One of the nice things about Prepare and Enrich is that it covers not only a wide variety of areas, but it can be utilized with couples that are in different stages of life as well. So maybe this is your first marriage, maybe it is a blending of families that come into play when you are preparing for this. So the idea is that we can support you in that process and support you in having conversations with your partner and planning ahead for success.
For more information about Prepare and Enrich, visit our website, hopehealingtherapy.com, or give us a call at 301-690-8404, extension 0.
Hey there, and welcome back to the Workspace podcast. We are finishing our conversation with Anastasia, our clinical director today, talking about the do's and the tricks and the tips and the boundaries to put in place. If you have not already listened to the first episode of this mini series, we did talk about the things to avoid and some difficulties and barriers with teleworking. And today we're going to talk about how to remedy those things. So Anastasia, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
And as some of you may know, and if you've listened to that previous episode, Anastasia is our clinical director here, and about 7-ish months ago, moved to Florida with her active duty husband. And so we have been very creative in figuring out how to make her clinical director position work. And today we're going to talk about the things that you've learned and the things that have been helpful. And I know that because of you working remotely, you work with clients that do some remote work, and you also have friends and colleagues that do. So I would love for you to just jump in and share with us, what are the things that we have to do to stay healthy and the boundaries that we need to put into place?
Yeah. I think that the biggest thing that one of my friends shared with me is to remember that you're working from home, not living at work. And I think that was a really good way of putting it, right? Like you work from home, but you're not living at work. And so I think that the balance and trying to keep the work-life balance is the biggest thing. Like that's the biggest do. So what are the hours that you're working, right? Like putting them on your calendar, right? Like knowing this is when I work, letting the other people that you live with know what your working hours are, right? So my husband knows that these are my work hours and that if my door is closed, that I can't be interrupted. And so that's been huge because in the early days, my schedule was changing. I was trying to figure out what hours were going to work best. Working in Eastern time, but living in Central time, like it's not a big time difference, but it's enough that it causes, you have to think. And so him knowing what hours I worked was huge, but also reminding my colleagues in Eastern time that I was in Central time was huge, so that if people text me and it's 6:30 here, I may not answer till 7. I'm up pretty early, but sometimes I don't see those messages. So I think that balance has been huge, and trying to make sure that we kind of keep that separation.
Yeah. And I'm sure that for some people who don't have the amazing boss that you do, probably have to have some conversations with their employers about what those hours are and what the expectations are.
Yeah. Like I used to always see 8 a.m. clients. 7 a.m. clients are really hard for me. I can do it every now and again. However, 7:30, I'm good. Like I'm awake. It's no problem. I'm awake at 7, but I like to have downtime in the morning. And if I start at 7, I lose some of that. And so I've worked really hard. And in the past episode, we talked about having that commute and having that time to get started at the beginning of the day and that wrap up time at the end. And so that's been huge for me. I am a huge movement, like I have to move, and sitting all day is really hard. And so I like to go for a walk before I start my work day. I like to go for a walk at lunch. I like to go for a walk after work. And my after work is definitely the longest one. But if I start too early, then I lose that morning time. And I know that that just kind of sets my day up to not feel like it's going to go at my best.
We talked a little bit about this in the previous episode, was, not setting those boundaries. And I can imagine that there may be people who are listening that say, well, if I'm up at 5:30, I may as well just start working, when the start time isn't until 7 or 8. And so I would imagine that one of the must do's is to set that boundary for yourself and recognize what your morning routine needs to be for yourself, and not just jumping in just because you're awake.
Well, and I think we talk so much with our clients about healthy sleep patterns, and we talk about sleep hygiene and doing the same things before you go to bed to kind of cue your body into it being time for sleep. It's similar with your morning routine, right? If you do the same thing, your body's going to slowly wake up and realize that the day is starting, and doing all of those pieces. So having that morning routine without doing too much, right? Like if you know that you have to start at 7 and you don't like waking up early, maybe a workout before work isn't the best option, right? If you know that you don't start until 9 that day and you're like, oh yeah, I totally have time. I can get up at my normal, do a workout. That sounds great. It's really figuring out what works for you without overdoing it. Because when we work from home, it's so easy to try, right? Like, oh yeah, I can squeeze in a workout because I only have to make it 2 minutes down my hallway. But if you were driving into the office, there's no way you'd have enough time. So yeah, there's a difference, but is it that much of a difference?
Yeah, and we have to be able to put in that morning routine, the getting ready for work. I'm sure that there are a lot of people that are creative with their camera ready appearance or not, right? Some people don't have to turn their camera on, so they're not necessarily showering or putting makeup on or getting
Yeah.
out of pajamas. What might be the do with regards to that?
It's the same as it is when you're working in the office, right? Like, at least for the most part, I will be honest, I like wearing comfy pants when I'm working from home, but I'm not going to wear my pajama pants, right? So even if you are wearing comfy pants, you can still change your clothes, right? Like, it's still that routine. It's still taking care of yourself. And if you know that you don't want to have to do your hair in the morning, then take a shower the night before. I mean, it's those little things in terms of, but you still want to do your hair, you still want to do your makeup, you still want to kind of figure out how to switch your brain into work mode, because you want to be able to present the best way that you can. I do have friends that don't have to turn their cameras on, so I'm sure that that's different. But at the bare minimum, changing your clothes, right? Like maybe not working in your pajamas, wearing real clothes, and then kind of having a good routine that makes you feel ready for the day.
Yeah, getting ready for the day and being in that work mindset is I'm sure very, very important. When we talk about, we know that we have to get ourselves ready for that working at home experience. What are some of the physical logistics and must do's that you have figured out or others might have shared with you?
Having a dedicated space, right? A space that is your workspace. In the past episode, I talked about the barrier that my husband and I ran into. Is we shared a office in the beginning, and when I wasn't with clients, he would pop in and do work, and that just didn't work for us. We work from home very differently. I like quiet, not music. He likes quiet music. So that can be really distracting, because if you're sitting next to someone that is putting headphones in or not putting headphones in and playing music, that disrupts for others. And can I do it? Absolutely. But is it ideal for me? And part of the conversation we had was we needed to separate our spaces, because this is my workspace. And so being able to have a separate space from him has been huge, but also it's my workspace, right? Like, I have my locking cabinet. I have everything that I need. in one space. I'm not spread out all over the kitchen island. I'm again, in the therapy realm, we need to have a space that no one can hear outside. So I have a sound machine on my door outside. And people know that if my door is shut, even if there's somebody else, like if we have anyone that comes over, if my door's shut, nobody bothers me, right? I imagine with other people who work from home or have little people, that's a lot harder, right? Like I'm sure that the temptation for a little person to open the door when they know their mom or dad is behind it is huge. So figuring out how to let the other people in your household know what your working hours are, because just because you're not leaving the house doesn't mean that you're not at work.
Yeah, absolutely. And having that separation between, okay, I'm going to work now. We did the get ready with me little videos, and I remember when you did yours, you were in the kitchen and then you said, okay, let's go to the office, and you walked down the hallway. But there is something symbolic in helping our brain to switch on when we go to that dedicated space and we close the door and we turn the sound machine on and we prepare ourselves for the physical space that we need, and then turning that off when we leave. And you mentioned in the previous episode about, and you don't have a commute, but you go for a walk to your mailbox, and so that's your kind of decompression time. And that's really, really important, whether our listeners are working from home fully or not. I would just offer, for a very long time, I had a 20 to 30-ish minute commute, and I then switched jobs a number of years ago at one point, and I had about a 2.5 mile commute. And it didn't take me very long to realize that while the commute was nice, especially in the morning, if I was running late, I really did need that 20 to 30 minutes to totally decompress. So when your commute is just seconds away from opening the door and being in the midst of the home, figuring out a way to have that decompression is probably very important.
Absolutely. And I think that having a routine, having set hours, following a to-do list, those are all the biggest pieces, because I mean, we talked about last time, one of the difficulties is the oversight. And so for me, I know that if I have any downtime, I have a whole laundry list of things that I can work on in those moments. And again, right? My boss understands that if I need something to do, I'm going to ask. But if she doesn't hear from me, she knows I'm working on something. And so it's nice that I have that type of relationship, because I could imagine that if I didn't, that would be really hard, because if you didn't trust what I was doing and know that I'm working on things, it may be like, well, what is she working on? So I think that having a routine, following your to-do list, keeping up with a schedule, like those are huge, right? It's the same thing that I would do in the office. I'm just doing it at my home office.
Yeah. And we talked about creating some good self-care boundaries too, making that as part of your to-do list, because it's really important. It is possible, but it is not healthy for us to sit in one chair for 8 hours or longer and just stare at a screen. I think we all learned that very early in the midst of the pandemic, and lots of people have tried lots of different things in order to make that telework space a little creative and a little healthier. What are some things that you have done, or maybe others have shared with you, that have been helpful in terms of creating some good, healthy things within that workspace?
Yeah. So for me, the biggest thing that I can do is I try to make sure that every 2 to 3 hours, I have some sort of movement break. Now, I'm not talking going for a 30-minute walk, but even just walking to refill my water bottle, or going outside, or just standing up and moving, right? Like we have to be able to make those small movements. I also bought a walking pad, and if I'm doing administrative work for at least an hour, I'll set it up and I'll walk and I'll type. I don't do that during session. It's kind of distracting, but it is something that I use throughout the day, because if I'm sitting all day, at least if I know, okay, well, I can walk for 45 minutes. I don't walk fast, but it's just moving, right? So other people use the under the desk bikes. That's a great one as well, if you don't have the option or the space to be able to set up a full like walking pad. I have a standing desk. So sometimes even in regular sessions, I'll stand the entire session if I need to. again, it's just figuring out those movement pieces. I mean, one of the luxuries of working from home is using those breaks to be able to throw throw a little laundry in or unload the dishwasher. But I have to remind myself that it's not my time to clean my house. But if I want to use 5 minutes of my lunch break to switch a load of laundry to make my life easier after work, I'll do that. So kind of also recognizing that I'm really grateful for the opportunity. And so I'm going to get all of my work done. I mean, again, I put a lot of pressure on myself, and I expect a lot from myself, but I also have to realize like this is something that I'm lucky to do. So I'm not going to A, take advantage of that, but B, I'm going to use it to my benefit when I can. Like, again.
Yeah, and I'm sure that there's some people who might feel pressure to do those household chores during the day if their work doesn't if it just isn't feasible, whereas you see that as a benefit to be able to just take a quick break from the work and change of scenery, move the body. And again, that's a boundary that folks are going to have to make sure that they put into place. And we've talked about getting sleep and taking care of yourself. It's all the same, whether you're, walking down the hallway to work or whether you're driving to work. We have to take care of ourselves. Any particular tricks or tips that you might share? I know we've talked about the things to do, and then previously we talked about the things not to do, but how do you then implement those things?
It's kind of a little bit of a learning curve, and sometimes it's trial and error. Like I said, things that I thought were going to work at the beginning of this journey and things that I've learned that are working now is very different. And I think that sometimes we feel like we have the opportunity to work from home. We should all love it. And so I think that, again, reminding ourselves that it's okay if you don't like it, right? Like I said, one of the hardest transitions for me was that not seeing people every day. I love people. I'm a people person. I love to chat. And so it's really challenging to go from having an office filled with people that you can say hi and have a quick conversation with to not. And so I think that that's one of the things that I would just remind it. It's okay if you don't like it. It's not for everyone.
It is not for me. I will be completely honest with you and with our listeners. At some point in one of these two episodes, we've talked about kind of the starting and the stopping time. And I know that for me during COVID, I was the person that would put off tasks until later and procrastinate. And then it's 8, 9 o'clock at night and I'm doing the things that I probably should have been doing during the day. And I very quickly recognized that was not for me. And so during COVID, I mean, I came to the office every day, didn't see clients in person, but I came to the office every day for that reason. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's definitely not for everyone. Now, some people may not like it, but it's what their jobs have done. So many companies went to telework during the lockdown, during COVID, and haven't gone back. Some companies have, but some companies haven't. So some of the people that are listening today might be a person that's saying like, yeah, I don't like teleworking, but it's what my job is. And so hopefully they're getting some good tricks to improve their overall satisfaction.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that again, like just like days in the office, it's those reminders that like your productivity is going to ebb and flow. Like that's okay. It's every day is going to be different. There's going to be days when you're in the office that you spend a little more time chatting with your coworkers or your colleagues than you do doing other things. And so I think that it's just again reminding yourself, like going back to what your schedule is, going back to what that looks like, following your boundaries. Like don't work in the evening just because you can, staying connected to people outside of your house and really figuring out a way to give yourself, let you know that the end of the workday is here. I thought it was interesting. One of my friends was telling me that they set their lights, like they have automatic lights and they set them to change as a visual signal. So like they go from one color to a different color in their workspace so that they know that's the end of their workday. Huh. And I would have never thought of that. But I think that that's a really interesting visual cue, especially if you're really honed in on something and and you lose track of time. That's, I think, a great transition. So it's figuring out what's going to work for you, using timers if you need to, setting alerts on your calendar. Like some people have to be very strict with keeping themselves on task. And luckily, there's so many amazing ways that we can do that. But figuring out what works for you. What works for me might not work for you, but it might be something you could give it as a shot.
Yeah, I just had this visual reminder of the Flintstones cartoon where they like got propelled out of their brontosaurus seat, at the end of the day when the bell rang. Not that I would like anyone to be propelled out of their chair, but sometimes we need that encouragement to say, it's the end of the day and it's time to turn the lights off, time to close the office door, and it's time to go live life outside of work.
I mean, I think the biggest other piece that I would say is giving yourself that break time, right? So eating your lunch away from your desk, eating it in the kitchen, eating it on the porch, eating it in the living, like just somewhere that's not your desk. I tend to read during my lunch because if I am just eating lunch, I will try to eat too fast and go back to work faster than I should. So I've taken to sitting at my island with my book and I'm going to read and I'm going to eat and I'm going to take the whole 30 minutes. So even if I don't finish or if I finish my food in 20 minutes, I'm going to sit for another 10 minutes and then come back. I'm going to do a loop around my block that takes 6 minutes to get around. So I know like, okay, I can do that. I'll be back. So it's really figuring out what's going to work for you. But I think my last tip would probably be to move your body, right? Like set a goal. Like, what do you want your movement to be today? And maybe it's a certain number of steps. Maybe it's a certain number of minutes. Maybe it's, you know what? I just want to walk during my administrative time. So I'm going to walk for 45 minutes. Like, what is your goal going to be? Because it's so easy to finish your workday and be like, wow, I have a whopping 250 steps today. And that's not healthy for anyone. If you're physically able to move, you want to do as much as you can. And maybe it's not 45 minutes, maybe it's 5 minutes, something to move your body and figuring out what that's going to look like for you each day.
So much of what we talked about today and in our previous episode really speaks to one of the messages that we kind of shout loud and clear. And that I would have fluorescent flashing signs everywhere if I could, in terms of this idea of self-care and taking care of ourselves. So what I would say to our listeners is that if you are a person that feels, you're teleworking, whether fully or partially, and you're feeling drained and you're feeling tired and you're feeling like, it's just exhausting, taking a survey of some of the do's and the don'ts, the barriers and the difficulties, the tricks and the tips that we talked about, and consider where can you start? Where are just a few little tweaks that you can make so that maybe within, a couple of weeks or the end of the month, you've made enough changes that you're not feeling so drained at the end of the day and you're feeling more productive and really taking care of yourself in a much healthier way.
Yeah. And I think if you have the flexibility, what are the work times that work for you, right? If you have the ability to know, you know what, that's a little too early for me. Can I start 30 minutes later? Having those conversations with your employer, if you're able to be able to say like, hey, can I adjust my schedule to reflect when I'm more productive? Because 9 out of 10 times, as long as you hit those core working hours, like when the majority of people are there, if there's a little flux, people are pretty open to it. And I mean, getting outside, vitamin D, working near a window, like anything that you can do, because if you're moving, if you're getting that sunlight, if you're going to feel better overall, especially right now while we have these short days.
Yeah. And one thing we didn't mention is part of the taking the break is also letting your eyes not be focused on that screen. I found, I hate that we continue to reference the lockdown and COVID, but really it's when all of us were thrown into teleworking and so many people have continued. And I remember the first couple of days, I had these terrible, terrible headaches. And, I have glasses that I wear for reading, and I was looking at a screen, so I wasn't really reading and didn't think I needed to wear them. And, after about 2 or 3 days of these really, really bad headaches, I started to wear them, even doing sessions, and the headaches went away. So making sure that taking the break kind of gives your brain and your eyes an opportunity to rest as well. Lots of screen time is not good for any of us.
Absolutely. And I think that that's one that I tend to forget about. So thank you for bringing that up, because I think at this point I've just been doing it. So my eyes get to a space where they are used to it. But you're right. Those breaks do allow for that screen time disconnection.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Anastasia, it was great to talk with you. We said in the first episode, and again, if you haven't listened to it, I ask you to invite you to go back, that, it took us a little bit of adjusting to figure this out. And so it's always fun whenever we have a chance to chat, because, prior to that, you or I would plop on each other's couch and chat for a few minutes, and we don't get that. So it was really fun to talk today. And for our listeners, we would love to hear what your tricks and tips are, and we're happy to share those with our listeners. So you can always send us a DM on our socials, or you can email me, Jennifer at hopehealingtherapy.com. Thanks so much for listening, and hope you have a great day.